Hey everybody, we got a bit of a different layout today. We're going to be working away from Unity in order to make some assets for our game, which we'll then import into Unity. Now, what we're going to work on today is called a tile set, and you can see I'm midway through my tile set. At the end of the video, or maybe at the start if I put it in the intro, you'll see what a complete tile set is meant to look like and how it can act. Now I'll just explain to you what a tile set is. A tile set is essentially building blocks that we can add to our game and manipulate to build our levels. It's like having a whole bag of Lego blocks. You don't have to worry about actually making the individual blocks themselves, but you're pretty sure that you can make pretty much anything with those individual blocks. Now here's the advantage. We're not going to be using a lot of bespoke assets in our game. Assets that we'll only be using one time or two times. For example, if I had a platform that was 3 units across and looked a little bit like this here, I would only be able to use it on certain levels and only in certain situations. What if I need a 2-unit platform or a 1-unit platform? I can't have that, and I'd have to remake the platform to fit those dimensions. That means more hand drawing or more just going back to our assets. But in this way, we have the building blocks, and I'll just demonstrate that right now. So I can set up a grid, and you're going to need to work with grids. I'll walk you through this a little bit, but we won't do a full session on this because I don't think you want to see me draw for ages. But I've selected one of my pieces, and these pieces are meant to snap to the tiles that they're in. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to move it, right? And there, we have a single platform. If I want to make it a double, there we go. If I duplicate it and then drag it across, there we go, triple platform. And now I hope you can see the advantage of using tile sets. So how do you get to actually making your own little tile sets? Now this is just a practice for me. This is pretty much the first run I've ever done of tile sets. But it's really important to use grids, proper measurements, and symmetry as much as you can. So as you can see, these bits are symmetrical. If I turn off the grid, you can see that it's kind of hard to figure out where this part ends and finishes. And it should be. You don't want it to be really obvious where one block starts and one block finishes. You want it to be a continuous thing. Think about Green Hill Zone. Think about Mario 1-1. All of these things, they're just built up on tiles, and we want to be able to bring that same effect. So I'll turn our grid back on, and we'll actually start by talking about the grid. Now the grid is important. I just made a new file. So I went File New, and I made this document 1080 by 720. And I added a grid, and in the settings for my grid, I actually made each square 150 by 150, and that's pixels. And that's something that we're going to need to be accurate about, because we'll be using that measurement to actually cut up our tiles when we import this into Unity. And that's something we're going to cover next part. But just remember your grid size, remember to do everything within the grids as much as you can. How do we stick to those grids? Well, every time you make a new workspace, go to File, New. You want the dimensions of your workspace to be the same as the dimensions of your grid. You can hit OK, create it. Doesn't really help me doing this because I'm pretty sure 90% of you use Photoshop and like 3% actually use the same thing I'm using. But now I have a blank. But this is one square. This is one piece of my grid. I can take off the grid lines here because I don't need them for this one in particular. And I'm just going to make that middle block that you saw missing from the pink platforms. So I'm just going to use that tool. Great. Fantastic. And what am I going to do? I'm going to copy it over back to my original document. So I have a document that holds all of these tiles. So all of this is just made up of smaller documents and held in a bigger document. And the bigger document has to be pretty big because it needs to be able to house everything that you have. Now that I've copied my piece, I can paste it into this document or duplicate it over, whatever. And then I can turn on my grid. I can turn off the feature to snap to grid because that's going to mess me up. And then I'm just going to align it according to my grid. And once I've got my block aligned, I can turn off the grid and just check without the grid being in the way to see if these things actually align properly. And for the most part, it does. If there's corrections that I need to make, I can trust that I just need to go back to my grid and see, is everything aligned properly. Once I've solved my problems, everything should look smooth. Now I'm going to run you through the shapes that you're looking to make to have a good tile set for what we're actually going to make. Right now these are going to act as my ground tiles, so this will be what the floor looks like. This will be the lower floor. Any turns and curves that I have outward, I need to do inward curves. This is going to be like a platform, a secondary thing that I can jump onto. Now to wrap this up, you'll see the end product at the end of the video. I'm going to leave a link to it also so we can stay together on this project. But I wanted to explain the kind of blocks that you'll want to make if you make your own tile sets. So here I have a straight line. This represents just a straight block, and this represents the curve that you're going to make as kind of an edge block. And then there's an inner curve, which you'll see in a little bit. That's important because if we say had a block going down over, you want it to be able to return. You can't just flip this over and think that will make sense, because it won't. You need another block for that kind of angle. And then just a centerpiece, a little filler block. This is the easiest one to kind of work with. This will be the one where you'll just be able to fill the level with it to kind of make things a little seamless on the bottom of the level. And yeah, that's about it. You can make different kinds of tiles. Maybe you want a waterfall or something like that. That's probably something we'll cover in the future, because you can animate these tiles. Now I'm back, as I said I would be, and I wanted to show you what the end result of your efforts should look like. So you can see that I have these tiles and they work in various combinations. So for example, I take this tile and I take this tile, and there we go, we can form a little curve. I can then take this tile, and with that curve we can make a corner, we could make a wall, we can make a bunch of different things. Now one thing I had to exercise was a little bit of patience, and that's because there were some things that I needed to learn as I was making my tile set. So I thought I'd just summarize them into some little tips for you before you start making your own tile set. Make sure that your blocks are symmetrical. That's going to help you out a lot. Without symmetry, especially at the ends, you see how my blocks curve? Well, even if I have the same connection point, it's going to look really strange, as you saw on the earlier version of this tile set. When I connect those things, if say this is curving up and this is curving up too, it's going to be really obvious where the connection is happening. So the more symmetry you have, the easier it's going to be to make this whole thing. What I would advise is flat lines, especially at the ends of your blocks, so that you know exactly where you need to connect them. And speaking about connection, definitely recommend just firing up a grid and working according to a grid to make sure that you have it almost pixel perfect. Takes a lot of time, but it adds to the quality of your product. Obviously we're not making a full running title here, but we need to know a little bit about just cleaning things up and making things look presentable. And that symmetry goes for the corners too. If you follow that same symmetry in the corners, then you should be alright. If I just made these straight angles and just went through and made these just straight lines, would have been a lot easier. But I had to just put in a little bit more effort to make the connection look more organic. But it is possible, and you only need this amount of tiles to do that. Now back to grids. If you have a grid enabled, then definitely if you have a snap feature in that grid, that'll allow you to snap between different grid blocks as you're editing this, you're going to want to use that when you actually compile your tile set, because that's just going to make life a lot easier. See, I can just move this here, and I can take this almost as if we're already in Unity, and I can just move that there, no problems. I didn't have to remeasure anything or make any adjustments to anything. And finally, I haven't done this myself, but working at the top of the block would probably be a great benefit, because you'd be able to make corner blocks, and just those connections would come through a lot easier if you were to work closer to the top, leaving less of a space than I did. See, if I had flat lines, then I would just be able to merge these in easily. And if I had a corner block, say it comes in at this point right on the edge, then if the top of this block is the top of the box, then it's going to connect without any issues. And so that's pretty much my take on tile sets. Still got a little bit to learn about angles, but we won't be touching that right now because I have a headache from working on this. Shouldn't take too long, but have fun with it, make it look good. I try to go for a Pop-Tart theme here, and then I completely contradicted myself with these tiles down here. But I really hope you can see the benefits of using tiles, but that's going to be where I'm going to leave it. Again, details in the description. I'll probably put the tips there and documents and everything. Have a fun time doing this and get ready for the next part.